bio, and we're going to turn it over to him. But so Daniel is a former middle and high school teacher. He's now a full-time staff apologist with Watchman Fellowship, Inc., and that's watchman.org. Not Watchtower, watchman.org. Daniel holds the Bachelor of Science in Education from Austin Peay State University and a Master's in Christian Apologetics from Houston Baptist University. He's co-editor and co-contributor to the 2019 book, The Story of the Cosmos, How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. He also produces 2 podcasts. Good Heavens is a science, cosmology, astronomy, and Glory of God podcast, and Apologetics Profile is world religions, cults, non-Christian worldviews, and apologetics. Daniel's interviewed a number of scientists and cosmologists and astronomers over the years, including Vatican astronomer. And Daniel, I need you to pronounce that name for me. The name of the
Guy Consolmagno.
Thank you, sir. Guy Consolmagno. I still can't say it. As well as Sasha Sagan, the daughter of the
Chicago. It's Italian. It's Italian.
So it may be Chicago, Daniel, but you know from my accent, this is not a Chicago accent, right? So Daniel's also interviewed Sasha Sagan, the daughter of the late planetary astronomer and science popularizer Dr. Carl Sagan. He lives in North Rural Texas, where he says the stars are big and bright. I mentioned in the email that we got somebody in the waiting room here. I mentioned in the email that I sent out that if anyone is interested in a signed copy of the book, Daniel has several copies, and if you are interested, I'll collect a list of folks that are and pass that along to Daniel, and he said it's $20, including the book and shipping, and it'd be an autographed copy. It's really I don't know if any of you have this book or not, but it's an awesome book. So beautiful illustrations in it, and it's got an all-star cast of contributors, including Daniel, Melissa Kane Travis, William Lane Craig. We had Sarah Salviander on a few months ago. She wrote one of the chapters. Luke Barnes. I would recommend the book, and if you're interested in the autographed copy of it, let me know, and I'll get the list over to Daniel, and he'll take care of it. Daniel, anything else that I can say to get this teed up for you?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. So you want me to go ahead and give you share screen, or maybe you've got it already, or?
I think I have it. Let's see. Yes. Yeah. No, you have to give it to me.
Okay, that should do it.
There we go. Yes. All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, let me back out of this. All right. Everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, good. Well, thanks for having me, Mike, and everybody else. It's a wonderful opportunity to share with you. And when you talk about the glory of God, every time I prepare a lesson, I feel like I shouldn't be talking about this. really, it's kind of humbling and it's scary because I think by the end of this, you're going to have more questions than I could possibly answer. And if I've done my job, then you will have a lot of questions that I can't answer. That's my goal tonight, is to put some mystery back into the glory of God. Not that just a reminder that we don't know everything that God does. God has revealed a lot to us. He has revealed himself to us in the person of Jesus. And so there's a lot we do know about God. But the heavens tonight, what we're going to be reminded of is that there's a lot that the heavens remind us of that we don't know about God, but that it should be an encouragement to us to see who it is, who is for us in Christ. And so tonight we're going to see some wonderful things that God has done and is doing in the universe tonight. So our talk tonight is the glory of God, and we're going to begin with the death of a star 34 years ago today. Sandulik 69202. On February 23rd and 24th in 1987, the year I graduated high school, a supernova was seen in the Large Magellanic Cloud in the southern hemisphere. It was the first time we saw a supernova up close in 400 years. The last supernova was seen by Johannes Kepler in the early 17th century. Sandulik was a blue giant star, and in 1987, astronomers didn't think blue giant stars went supernova. But Sandulik 69202 made headlines in February, first supernova in 400 years that we saw up close and personal, and this one is phenomenal. So here's some pictures that we have. This is from the Chandra X-ray telescope, a nice blue ring from Chandra. That's the X-ray light coming from the supernova. Then we have visible light from the Hubble Space Telescope, the green image there. And then we also have the Large Millimeter Array, the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, which is an array of telescopes in the Chilean desert. We got that nice little orange blob. So, and then if you take all of these and you get a composite, it's something spectacular. People are still looking at this going, what's going on? Nobody knows. In fact, because of the nature of the star, astronomers believe that there should be a neutron star remnant in the middle of this somewhere, but they have yet to find anything. So Sandulik SN 1987A continues to puzzle and marvel, cause us to puzzle and marvel over what exactly happened and what this is. And so I like to use this as an analogy for the Gospels. We have the death of the Son. We have the glorious Lord Jesus who comes to us. And you have Matthew there in blue, and you have Mark in green, and then you have Luke in orange, and then you have John, right? John's the composite, right? It's the one that doesn't look like anything else the other ones do, right? But it's different perspectives of light, right? Different shades of light coming to us through the Gospels. And so that's just kind of a visual imagery, but this is the glory of God. He made this visible to us. And so that's a wonderful composite of Sandulik, or what was once Sandulik 69202, 34 years ago today. So the Bible tells us the heavens declare the glory of God. In Psalm 19, we read that the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. The word expanse there is the same word used in Genesis when God created the expanse. The Hebrew is rakia. And day to day pours forth speech. Night unto night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Yet their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. So there is a tacit, silent speech emanating from the heavens, day unto day, night unto night. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run its course. Its rising is from the one end of the heavens, its circuit to the other end of them, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. Psalm 19, 1-6. Some language to take out of this verse. There's speech, knowledge. We have poetic allusions to the sun, to a bridegroom, to a strong man, and of course, glory. The Hebrew word for glory is kabod, which means heaviness. If you've ever been pulled over by a police officer or have been in the presence of somebody famous, or you've come into a lot of money, or you've had some sort of wonderful experience or some sort of terrifying experience, That's kind of what glory is. We had some people on the way to, I believe it was Hawaii from Denver International Airport just a couple of days ago. And as they're just climbing altitude, they lost an engine. And so those people were feeling it. And when the plane landed, everybody cheered. So there was a great stress. A lot of people thought that was going to be it, but they survived and applauded when the plane landed. So glory is kind of that scary, terrifying goodness, if I can accurately explain it. It means weighty in Hebrew. It's just magnificent. It's a hard word to capture in English. And it has all of these things, right? We think of the sun, we think of a bridegroom, we think of a strong man, we think of speech and knowledge. All of these things are pointing to Christ, whether poetically, literally, figuratively. All of these things are pointing to Christ, which I will argue is the glory of God revealed to us. So this is the Logos that we have in John's Gospel, John 1. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. And so all things were made through him and for his glory, as Paul says in Colossians. So the Logos, Jesus is the Word made flesh, and through him, God made the universe. And so the Bible refers to Jesus in a multitude of different ways. Revelation 22:16 is one of my favorite allusions to Christ. He's the root of David and the bright and morning star. And that's found in Revelation 22:16, the Lord Jesus Christ. There are several Old Testament and New Testament allusions to Jesus. He's the light of the world, he says in John 8:12. And so there's this allusion throughout Scripture to light. And if you look at Luke 24:27 on the road to Emmaus, Jesus tells his disciples, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, David, everything, the Psalms, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, everything that pertains to him in the Scriptures as he's walking along the Emmaus road. And so allusions to light abound throughout Scripture, as we'll see tonight. And then Psalm 8, another one of my favorite Psalms. This was a Psalm that Buzz Aldrin took to the moon in July of 1969. He had a little piece of paper in his suit pocket. He couldn't take a Bible with him because of the load-bearing limitations, but he had Psalm 8 in his little suit pocket, and he read it as he poured communion wine in the lunar lander. And it says, "O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens." Now, this psalm comes after the first Psalms 3-7, which we have distress, oppression, and calling out and depending upon Yahweh for assistance and for help. And so Psalm 8 is a praise after some lament and Lord, help me and my enemies and this and that. And so David just sings a praise in Psalm 8. And part of that praise is he looks to the heavens. When I look at your heavens and I consider the works of your fingers, the things you have made, the sun, the moon, the stars, all of these things. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? In other words, David is astounded that the Lord of the universe would hear his prayer and care for him in the midst of his trouble. And so that's a wonderful psalm as well that references the heavens. And then, of course, in John 1, as I just read a little bit ago, in him, in Jesus was life, and life was the light of men. And I love this verse, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And that goes back to the illusions of the supernova that we just looked at. For 34 years, people have been going, what is that? What's going on with this star that wasn't supposed to go supernova? But since it did, we expect it to leave back a neutron star, but we haven't found that yet. What's going on? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And then Jesus says in John 16, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation," as we saw just a minute ago in the Psalms. "But take courage, I have overcome the world." That word world in John, which he uses throughout, is cosmos or cosmon, from which we get the word cosmology and cosmos. That's what Carl Sagan used. It means an orderly arrangement. It can be the universe, and it could be communities and cities and people, nations, the cosmos, the world. And so that's a very common Greek term that John used in his gospel. Now, I'm going to go really quickly through some unknown mysteries and come back to these and share the links, and if you're interested more. But these are some unknowns currently in the field of astrophysics and cosmology and astronomy. Recently, in November of last year, scientists have calculated that there's mysterious light from unknown sources that is filling the universe. they did some mathematical calculations. This is a theoretical cosmology, and they've added up some stuff, and they said, now, wait a minute, what's going on here? The amount of light coming from mysterious sources was about equal to all the light coming from the known galaxies, says the gentleman Mark Postman, who works at the Space Telescope Science Institute, where Hubble is run. So maybe there are unrecognized galaxies out there, he says, or some other source of light that we don't know what it is. That's a wonderful thing. I mean, this was November of last year. There's light in the universe, and we don't know where it's coming from. That's wonderful. I think that's great. We've also encountered for the last couple of years, since 2007, I believe it is, so for the last 14 years, scientists have been finding fast radio bursts. They are bursts of intense energy on the radio spectrum, the radio end of the electromagnetic spectrum. Bursts of energy that are equivalent to a month's worth of our sun's energy, just in a millisecond. And so just recently, some scientists have done some calculating and believe that fast radio bursts might be coming from gamma ray bursts. But the funny thing is, nobody knows what a gamma ray burst is, really, except it's a burst of gamma ray light coming from something. And gamma ray bursts can put out as much energy as our sun in its entire lifetime. So fast radio bursts are a mystery. They believe are tied to gamma ray bursts, but gamma ray bursts are also a mystery. What is the engine of these high energy light bursts? We don't know. And in I think it was in 2013, in November of 2013, or this may go, no, this is the other one. This is 2016. So there's this group of quasars in the constellation of Leo. Now a quasar is a sort of a compact word meaning quasi-stellar object. We don't really know what these are, really. They're like a star, but sort of, but not really. I don't even know what they are, really. But there's this huge structure of quasars grouped together, a community of quasars in the tail end of the constellation of Leo that is 8 billion light years in length. 8 billion light years in length. Like a string of Christmas lights that is 8 billion light years long. A light year is 5.8 trillion miles, I believe it is. But that size. What's fascinating about the huge quasar group, I love the name, huge large, is that it's in a part of the universe where there's not been enough time in the current Big Bang cosmology to have had this develop within that time. The structure shouldn't be there. It sort of defies Einstein's concept of homogeneity and isotropy, that the universe is pretty much the same in all directions. But that's not the biggest thing in a universe. Well, there's where you can't see it with a telescope, basically, but that's the where the quasars are presently. And here, the gamma ray bursts, we just talked about those. And this is the largest object known in the known universe right now. In 2013, just about 8 years ago, the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall is a filament of galaxies stretching 10 billion light years. Gamma ray bursts, a few gamma ray bursts led to the discovery of this. Some people have challenged whether or not it's a legitimate structure held together gravitationally, but there's been additional research. And right now, as far as I understand it, this is a filament of millions, if not billions, of galaxies stretching 10 billion light years in length and 7 billion light years wide. Again, in an early part of the universe, about 10 billion light years from where we are. And again, this structure goes against Einstein's concept of homogeneity and isotropy, where this is just too big to be in the part of the universe where they have discovered it based on redshifts. So this is a great mystery. How did this wall get here? We don't know. Here's just a quick picture of an artist's rendition of what this Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall. It's called Hercules Corona Borealis because of the constellations in which it crosses. Billions of galaxies, billions of light years long. And that's where it's located, right there in the constellation of Hercules. Above that is the Corona Borealis, the northern crown. Just to the left there is Draco's head. That's the constellation of Hercules. This is basically the large scale structure of our universe within 1 billion light years, I think. I'm not sure what the distance here is. But there's some limited research out there right now. If you look at the strings, those are the filaments. The white dots are galaxies, not stars. And they're clusters of galaxies strung together like filaments. And this has led some astronomers to conclude that our universe might be structured like a honeycomb. And so this was way back in the 1990s. I don't know how much of this has evolved since then. But if you look at the voids, the dark spots You can see the Capricornus void, the Microscopium void, the Corona Borealis void. These are voids where there's no galaxies. And you can see how potentially it might have a sort of soccer ballish, sort of honeycomb-like structure to them, because there are voids of very few galaxies throughout our universe. And so that's possible. Another mystery is what we call technetium in red giant stars. It's the periodic table element number 43, 17 more protons in its nucleus than iron. This thing is heavy. And the only way currently that people believe that heavy elements are produced are in supernova, like we saw at the beginning of the broadcast. Sandulik explodes, and in that explosion, they believe, is where heavier elements are fused. But now the mystery of technetium is where it's found in red giant stars, in the photosphere of red giant stars. Now, it's unique because technetium only has a half-life of about 2 million years, and red giant stars are billions of years old. So what is technetium, a very short-lived periodic element, doing in the photosphere of a red giant star that's billions of years old? And we don't know. We don't know. It could have been captured. There are theories out there, but this remains somewhat of a mystery. It was even mentioned in Neil deGrasse Tyson's book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. So this is a unique mystery for which there is presently no scientific answer, as we know of yet. And then these are a handful of other cosmic mysteries: dark matter and dark energy. There's the strange, wonderful KIC 8462852, where there's stuff passing in front of it. Nobody knows what it is. And then we talked about voids of just a second ago. There's the biggest void in the universe. It's called the Great Void in the constellation of Boötes. It's a bubble of emptiness, 250 million light years in diameter, for which there is no virtual explanation, because it's basically, there's only about 60 to 100 galaxies within 250 million light years. So what emptied that? Nobody knows. Population 3 stars, the strange visitor from afar we had a few years ago, Oumuamua. We have the cosmic horizon problem, which is the uniform temperature of the earliest light in the universe. We have quadrupoles and octopoles in the cosmic microwave background radiation that look like they're aligned with the solar system. And that couldn't possibly be, because the background radiation came long before our solar system, but yet the background radiation looks like it has the imprint of our solar system within it. And then solar systems discovered since 2009 suggest ours is a unique arrangement, with rocky planets in close to the sun and gaseous giants out away from the sun. We're finding solar systems that are exactly the opposite of that. So a lot of unsolved cosmic mysteries. So I'm not saying we don't know, therefore God, but rather God, therefore we don't know. And so this verse comes to mind when we think of cosmic mysteries, at least for me. God has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, that's us, so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning, even to the end. Ecclesiastes 3:11. And so I have an example from cosmology of just what this scripture means, where man has put eternity in our hearts. Now, when you study cosmology and astronomy, this came up in a debate with Sean Carroll. Dr. Sean Carroll is an astrophysicist or a cosmologist. He debated Bill Craig in New Orleans a couple of years ago. Sean Carroll Googled this. He told Bill Craig, I think it was during the Q&A, he Googled eternal cosmologies. These are all cosmologies with the idea of a universe, or prior to a universe, or some kind of model that tries to explain our universe using the concept of eternality. And so it's almost inescapable that when you try to talk about where the universe came from or what the universe is, that you find yourself wrestling with this concept of what is eternal. In short, for me, I think you can't finally talk about the universe without bringing up the idea of infinity or eternity. God has put eternity in our hearts, and every time we talk about what he has created, we can't seem to avoid this idea of eternity or infinity. Very interesting. God of the gaps? No, I'm not arguing God of the gaps. Here's how that might work. A personal explanation. Mike made coffee. What's the coffee doing on the table? Well, Mike made it. That's a good explanation, right? There's another kind of explanation too, a technical or a mechanical explanation of a coffee maker, maybe the biology of beans. Both are good explanations, right? So I could say God created the universe. That's a great explanation. That's a personal explanation. I could also say we could get into the technical details of periodic tables of forces, strong, weak nuclear forces and all of that. That's also an explanation. Neither of these explanations cancel one another out. Just because I can explain the technology of a coffee maker does not do away with Mike. See that? So that's kind of two different ways in which I talk to atheists a lot, and they always say that I'm making God of the gaps arguments. And I said, no, there's two different kinds of explanations, and they're not mutually exclusive. They kind of go together. One can be personal, one can be technical. So I want to briefly mention more about the glory of God in Scripture. If you have your Bibles and you want to follow along, I want to just briefly go through Isaiah 40. Without getting into it too deeply, some of you may or may not know that a lot of scholars will say that Isaiah was book 1 and book 2, that somebody wrote book 2, it wasn't Isaiah. But the reason is because a lot of modern conceptual scholarship refuses to acknowledge the idea of prophecy. And so Isaiah is what we would call telescoping. He's looking to the future in two different dimensions. And so in verse 40 of Isaiah, we've had Israel has been captured and delivered from Assyria, and now Israel has been taken captive to Babylon. And now Isaiah is prophesying that God's people will be released in the future from Babylonian captivity. And so and ultimately he's pointing to Jesus as well. And so you have this concept of God's glory through the prophet Isaiah looking to the future. And chapter 40 begins, "Oh, comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended, that her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Let every valley be lifted up and every mountain be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain and the rugged terrain a broad valley." You would recognize that as what was fulfilled in John the Baptist. So Isaiah is talking here also about deliverance from Babylon, but ultimately a future deliverance from sin through the person of Jesus. And so there's several things here going on. Look at verse 5 in chapter 40. "The glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." And so in some sense, gentlemen, that God has given us this sort of double future-looking idea of God's glory. We have the glory of the heavens, proclaiming the glory of God to us day unto day, night unto night, in a silent, tacit speech. But we also have the glory of the Lord revealed to us, not just in the stars, but through the person and the work of Jesus, ultimately. And so we see the glory of God in the heavens, and we should be reminded as Christians that that's pointing to the future deliverance and ultimate return of Jesus, his deliverance for us on the cross, and then his future return ultimately to deliver and seal and recreate everything new. But in Isaiah 40, remember, Isaiah is speaking to a forlorn Israel. And in verse 26, he says to Israel and Jacob, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of these stars, not one of them is missing." And then the next verse, "Why do you say, Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord?" And so Isaiah is using the stars. Look up at the stars and remember that God names and numbers all these things. Why do you think he can't see you? And be encouraged. And so Isaiah is speaking out comfort to God's people. You will be delivered from your captivity. You will be delivered from your sin, not for your sakes, but for the glory of God. And so that's, of course, goes along with Matthew and the John the Baptist is calling. Now, if you look in Matthew, if you go to Matthew chapter 3 very quickly, this is where the fulfillment of Isaiah comes to pass. In Matthew 3, you have Jesus's baptism. Remember that. And so Jesus arrived from Galilee at the Jordan, coming to John to be baptized by him. But John tried to prevent him, saying, "I have need to be baptized of you, and you do not come to, and you come to me." And Jesus answered and said, "Permit it at this time, for in this way it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." And then he permitted him. And after being baptized, Jesus went up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove and coming upon him. And behold, a voice out of the heavens, saying, "This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased." And so that silent glory that we see in the stars is parted. The sky is parted, like Stephen in Acts. He looks up and he sees the heavens parted, and he sees Jesus. And here we hear the Father's voice and we see the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove and we see Jesus's baptism. This is a wonderful Trinitarian part of the verse. But you see the heavens step aside for the voice of the Lord. The heavens are parted so Stephen can see what the glory of God is all about. And so when we look up into the universe, it is only the precursor to what ultimately has been done for us in Jesus. And it should be in these last days, reminders to us that Jesus is returning. And so what Isaiah is doing, and I think this is a neat thing for what we're talking about, it's something called a near-far view in exegetics and hermeneutics, a near-far view where you're looking to the future in a second or third dimension. It's also called telescoping, that you leap from one peak to another. So Isaiah is talking about Babylon. He's also talking about prophesying about Jesus. So in some hermeneutical texts, you'll read this idea of telescoping or a near-far view. And so we read through this as the voice of one calling out in Isaiah. In Psalm, the heavens are calling out. And then in John and Matthew, we hear the baptism of Jesus. We hear the Father's voice. And then Stephen in Acts, he sees the heavens parted and he sees the glory of God standing there. And so this is in our book. This is in my opening chapter. I just want to wrap up here with this. This is the Hubble Deep Field. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this. This is what you would see if you looked up tonight in a clear sky, just as the Dipper is going up. Right off the cup of the Dipper is the Hubble Deep Field. This was back in the late 90s. Hubble took some pictures of a blank spot of sky as big as a tennis ball, 2/3 of a mile away. So you're not going to be able to see this with your naked eye. So you see, well, there's nothing there. This is from my software program, Stellarium, but there is actually something there. This is what Hubble saw. So this is what we see, but you use Hubble, you telescope, and you see 3,000 galaxies. This was revealed to the public December 18th, the December of 1995. It was astounding, took our breath away. We weren't expecting quite this. These are all galaxies, not stars. There's a couple of stars in the foreground there, but all of these blips of light are galaxies in December of 1995, 3,000. Now, a gentleman named Matt Mountain at the Space Telescope Science Institute, not to be outdone by his progenitor, his former boss, or the former director, which was Bob Williams, who did the deep field. Matt Mountain did the ultra deep field. And so he took Hubble one step further and looked at another spot of sky in the southern hemisphere. Now, this spot of sky was as big as a pinhead held out at arm's length. So again, that's what we would see from the ground. This is what Hubble saw in 2003, 2004, telescoping over 10,000 never before seen galaxies. These are all galaxies in that spot of sky. A pinhead held out at arm's length. So just look up at the ceiling and how many pinheads would just cover your ceiling. And in each pinhead that would cover your ceiling might be upwards of 10,000 galaxies or more if we're not looking into a great void. Pretty remarkable. So you can see what the naked eye can see and what the telescope can see. Pretty wonderful. And so this came about. This is where our book came from. We had the Hubble Space Telescope Science Institute researcher, Dr. Anton Kokomower, who was the project image manager for those images I just showed you. That's Dr. Kokomower on the right. We had him come to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary with my thesis advisor, Dr. Michael Ward, who wrote Planet Narnia and is a C.S. Lewis scholar. We had them both on the stage together in one night talking about C.S. Lewis, Narnia, and the Hubble Space Telescope. That is where our book came from. It was a well attended. There were over 200 people there to talk about science fiction. The Hubble meets Narnia. It was a wonderful event. And there's Dr. Kokomower presenting some Hubble images. The crowd was pin drop silent as Dr. Kokomower was going through Hubble images. It was wonderful. And that's where our book came from. That's Paul Gould there on the right. He came behind me and he said, Dan, this is a great presentation. We should do a book. I thought Paul was crazy. I didn't know who Paul was. And that's where the story of the cosmos came from this event at the Land Center at Swibitz a couple of years ago. Wonderful. People are hungry for this. People want to know more about the universe, and with the coronavirus and the lockdowns, astronomy is becoming more and more popular. So our book is great. We have no 1 or 2 star reviews yet. It's been out since July of 2019, and it's getting nothing but good reviews. We just didn't have a marketing budget for it, so not a whole lot of people know about it, but I'm happy about that. No bad reviews yet. Luke Barnes, if you're really interested in the fine tuning, Luke Barnes appears in our book. He's written 2 books, The Cosmic Revolutionary's Handbook and A Fortunate Universe. If you're really into the fine tuning aspect of the cosmological arguments, Luke is the person to go to. He's been on our podcast. I've talked to him many times. He's a great guy. You'll enjoy those books if you really are science minded. This is a book Dr. Kokomower recommended to me when I talked to him. And this is just reminding us that the way the world is organized, the way the cosmos is organized, the odds are multi-tillions to 1 against an origin by chance and natural design, natural processes. But this is a quote from, I think it was Sir Arthur Eddington, who would say that, yeah, it looks like our universe is designed, but I wouldn't call it design. I would call it anti-chance. Eddington was not a theist. So he used that language, but he wasn't about to say God did it. And this is my favorite quote from Robert Jastrow, when Big Bang cosmology was growing and becoming more codified in the sciences. For the scientist who has lived by his faith, in The Power of Reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. And so Paul uses Psalm 19 when he's talking about the proclamation of the gospel. He quotes from Psalm 19 and Isaiah. I just read from that. Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created the stars. And this concluding image, this is Omega Centauri. You can see it low in the southern horizon. You people, if you're up in Chicago, you probably wouldn't see this, but Florida and down in the south, you can see this low on the southern horizon in the summertime. This is Omega Centauri, the largest known globular star cluster in our galaxy. This is a Hubble close-up of some of those stars. 10 million suns in that globular cluster. Those are all stars of various different sizes and colors. 10 million all clustered together. Reminds me of Genesis 15:5. Star differs from star in glory in 1 Corinthians 15. And then what Jesus says, what God and the pre-incarnate Christ says to Abraham in Genesis 15:5. Count the stars if you're able. Your descendants will be like the stars. And so that will wrap up my presentation, and I will be happy to take questions. That was kind of rapid fire. I may have skipped some things, and it made sense to me, but maybe it didn't make sense to anybody else. So questions.
That is so good, Daniel. So I was going to make a couple of comments while folks are maybe formulating any questions, but I just did a lesson for 8th graders Sunday night at church, and talking about just, the point was, however big your perception of God is, you're thinking too small. And I was just using universe kind of metrics to make that point. The Voyager spacecraft, which was launched back in 1977, is out of our solar system now, and I think the last picture it sent back was what's called the pale blue dot. It was like 3.7 billion miles from Earth, and we were, of course, the pale blue dot. But kind of interesting statistics. The Voyager speed is 38,700 miles per hour. It would take Voyager to traverse the Milky Way. If you went from one side of the Milky Way to the other, it would take Voyager 1,700,000,000 years just to traverse the Milky Way. Even if it was moving at the speed of light, it would take almost 100,000 years to go across our Milky Way. And the latest estimates that I could find in terms of galaxies, and Daniel, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but the number I saw was 2 trillion galaxies are estimated based on the scientific knowledge that we have. So kind of making the point. However,
yeah, what Hubble is doing now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what Hubble does now is they've been doing this for a while. They don't do the deep field projects so much anymore, but every time Hubble is, I know a couple of times, they'll take a sort of a deep field like picture. As they're looking at one spot of sky, they'll just do some more field surveys of other spots of sky, and they're pulling in images like they have of the deep field. So unless they're aiming into, even when they aim into basically a void of space, they're still bringing back a ton of stuff. So the trillions estimate of galaxies is based on the Hubble data since the early 2000s. And it just seems to keep getting more and more. And when James Webb goes up, I don't think anybody's going to be ready for what we see with that. That's going to be some remarkable stuff. It's delayed until next year, but yeah, the heavens just keep getting bigger and more wonderful and more mysterious. So we haven't solved a ton of mysteries. And as soon as they launch, we just put something on Mars, we're going to have more questions. Voyager, speaking of Voyager, Wayne and I, my podcast co-host, we're going to be talking about what Voyager has found out there. There's Voyager 1 and 2, and they're bumping into some interesting things out on beyond the edge of the solar system. We're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks, hopefully.
Yep. So one just personal aside too. I love to talk about Hubble. I mean, it's been up since, well, over 30 years now. It's been in operation, but it's been there long enough. My dad worked on the launch project for Hubble as his last project when he worked at NASA. He died in 95. And so, I mean, Hubble's been up there sending some amazing pictures back for a long time.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's so true.
Okay, questions, anyone? Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Daniel, can you make your PowerPoint available?
Because I work at Watchman, Rick, I'm not allowed to. I wish I could, but it's kind of our intellectual property, and so I guess you can watch it on video, but my boss James has made it sort of a kind of a, like an NFL player sharing their playbook or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just because then, well, the reason James says it, he says it's really practical because you give it away, and then you're giving away everything to everybody that asks. And these things take time to make. And so he's like, you don't want to be giving your PowerPoint away to everybody every time somebody asks you. So we just, as a ministry thing, we just don't do that, unfortunately. Sorry.
That's okay. I understand.
Daniel, how often do you do a podcast, and how can we find it?
Okay, so I do 2 podcasts. I do my weekly Apologetics podcast on Podomatic. It's called Apologetics Profile Podcast. And it's apologetics topics like, you name it, philosophy, science, whatever, and biblical arguments, historicity of the Gospels, that kind of thing. And we do cults, and we do other religions and worldviews on our Apologetics Profile. It's quite a variety of things. That's great. And then I do Good Heavens. So it's patreon.com/Good Heavens. And me and Wayne have been talking about the universe from a biblical perspective since 2017, going on 4 years this year. And Wayne has got a background in science, and I just love the astronomy. I'm not the science guy. I love it. I've been collecting science things all my life. But we just chat. We were having dinner in a friend's living room several years ago, and they're like, you guys should do a podcast. And Wayne and I are like melancholies. We're like, no. Why should we do a podcast? Who's going to listen to our podcast? And then 3 years ago, we're still going. So patreon.com/Good Heavens, and then Podomatic Apologetics Profile podcasts.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Doug.
So Dan, I know that kind of models and concepts and paradigms are always moving around in the sciences, and particularly in astronomy. You had a comment there somewhere buried in your PowerPoint that some things were so big that they couldn't have been that big given the current theory of the Big Bang. Did I understand that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if so, what are people trying to do with that? I mean, theory-wise, what are people coming up with other explanations, or what's going on?
Well, that is so like the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall. Allegedly, it's a filament of galaxies. Now, you have to sort of demonstrate that they're gravitationally bound to even be able to make sense to call this thing a structure. So some people are challenging challenging the gravitational boundness of this thing and saying, oh, you're just picking random dots out of the sky. Like if you looked at stars and did it connect the dots and you made a rabbit. Well, that star and that star, well, like a perfect example is the star cluster of the Pleiades. I think just a couple of years ago, it was finally figured out that the Pleiades are not gravitationally bound to each other. I'm sorry, it was the binary star of Albirio in the foot of the Northern Cross. It looks like a binary star in a telescope. And for years, astronomers have been trying to figure out, is that a legit binary or do they just look like they're close together? And they just recently discovered that they just look like they're close together. They're not actually gravitationally bound. So the challenge with this long structure is demonstrating the redshifts, the gravitational attraction, that this is actually one structure. But from what I understand, it seems to be a legit thing. And so it's like the same problem that's undermining natural selection and evolution with all the work that Michael Behe is doing, all the work that Stephen C. Meyer has been doing. There's a great deal of good science. Even David Galertner, the Yale computer mathematician who's not a theist, has given up Darwinism because of the work of the Discovery Institute, and he recognizes the very impeccable work of what they're doing at the Discovery Institute. And so the popular level, everything is fine, the science is, everything is fine, nothing to see here. But below the surface, there's a dire need of paradigm shifts in biology and cosmology. They both need to happen. And so we are sitting on the cusp of probably what the medievals were going through when Copernicus made the little suggestion that the Earth was moving. Martin Luther made fun of Copernicus, the little silly man with the silly idea that we're moving. Anybody can go outside and see we're not moving. So the stationary Earth was in place for 2,000 years since Aristotle. And here comes a little man with barely any tools making this suggestion of heliocentrism. And we sit on the cusp of something like that, both in biology and cosmology. There's something that needs to happen because the dearth of explanatory paradigms for what I talked about, just touched the iceberg. Something needs to change. I mean, we're banking on dark matter and dark energy. And I read one cosmologist who said, you invoke the Easter Bunny 2 times, something's wrong. If you go back to the 1600s and 1700s and you look at all the epicycles and epicycles within epicycles and all the ways in which people were trying to save geocentrism, it got nuts, and we're kind of there with many theories of gravity. So it's we're sitting in exciting times, Doug, and I think it's going to be a battle for a while before we have a breakthrough. And even if we had a breakthrough, people would be loath to admit it. I think to change the paradigm of things. People say, well, science doesn't mind changing. Yes, it does. People resist it, and that's because it's a human endeavor. So that's what I think.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mike.
Sorry, I'm telling Brad he's on mute and I'm on mute. Go ahead, Brad. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So I would just ask you, how would you answer the person who uses the vastness of the universe to say, therefore, we're obviously inconsequential and God couldn't have had any, or there couldn't be a God because we're just this dot on a speck of dust. How would you respond to that?
Good question, Brad. For the last year, we just went through the coronavirus. In case we didn't know, that's a very small thing and it's not insignificant. So we're not talking about size equaling significance, right? It's just doesn't work that way. How big do you have to be significant? 6 feet tall, 400 pounds? What the size? It's a what they call a non sequitur. Size does not determine significance. And Mike said it back just a few minutes ago. The pale blue dot, Valentine's Day of 1990. Carl Sagan's soliloquy, his beautiful reflection on what the pale blue dot was all about. And in the opening chapter of our Cosmos book, I talk about this insignificance question, where since we're not the center of the universe, and since we're so small and the universe is so big, therefore, basically, it's a colloquial way of saying God doesn't exist. The universe wants to kill you, Brad. Don't you know? You're just a speck of dust. You're a mote of dust floating in a sunbeam. And so you're just cosmically insignificant because you're so small. Well, let me tell you, there's a whole discipline in science called physics that study things that are very small. And if you tell a physicist that the Higgs boson is not significant, he will smack you, right? Because they study very small things, and to them, they build their life pursuing and cutting up and smashing together small things. So that's not insignificant. And I'll tell you another thing. If that Martian rover finds a bacteria in the crater, that's not going to be insignificant either, right? So why is Martian bacteria significant? That would be tremendously significant. But we in the universe, with Starbucks and zebras and whales and giraffes and orangutans, why is that not significant, right? So it really is a guise to get rid of God. You know, that the whole I'm small, God couldn't possibly care for you. It's Psalm 8. Why are you, David says, David acknowledges, I'm small. I am small. Why do you care for me? So we're not saying we're big. We're just saying that we're not insignificant just because we're small, right? That's the fallacy.
Amen.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, Daniel, one of Sarah Salviender's articles, I can't remember where I read it, but she made the point that the young Earth apologists are not only embarrassing Christianity, but are damaging to the general evangelical effort. What do you think about that?
Well, Sarah and I are good friends, and I am also my friend Wayne, who's my very good friend, who's my podcast co-host. I live in two worlds, Rick. I love the Salvienders, and I love my friend Wayne. Wayne is young Earth. Sarah is not. So here's what I've learned. We just had about a month ago or two, Danny Faulkner on our show. Danny is the chief astronomer for Ken Ham's Answers in Genesis. Now, you say Answers in Genesis to a group of atheists, and watch out, right? Nobody likes Ken Ham. That's what it's just a mess if you're talking in the field of apologetics. Some people excoriate Ken Ham. Why did you build a boat? Whatever. Or Ray Comfort. You pick your evangelical who's out there on a spectrum, and oh, you're such an embarrassment, this and that. Danny is so level-headed. In fact, Rick, I asked him a very similar question that you just asked. I said, Danny, what kind of flack do you get from your colleagues? Not at AIG, obviously, but Danny goes to astronomy conferences. He rubs shoulders with secular astronomers. He is in the field. He's not just hanging out in the boat. He goes out and he does his thing. He does field work. He's still out in the telescope. He does telescope viewing things. He is an active astronomer. He's not ivory tower. He is so down to earth. He is such a nice guy, such a wonderful guy. And I asked him, and he says, I don't get any pushback. And he says this to me. He says, well, because astronomy and cosmology is kind of a weird science. It's the one field of science where people will say, that's kind of weird, but okay, pursue it. So I think, Rick, a lot of times what I've seen, like my friend Wayne, he's not going to come up to you and slap you around because you're an old Earth person. In fact, there's young and old Earthers in our book. We just didn't identify them. But Wayne tries to find that middle road. I try to find that middle road because of what I just said to Doug a few minutes ago. We sit on the verge of some paradigm shifts, maybe in our lifetime, maybe in our kids' lifetime or whatever. And so I think the greatest thing that we need, because I have seen young Earth evangelists, if you will say, that do act in an embarrassing sort of manner, that's the foot they lead with. If you're a Christian and you're enamored with who Christ is, that is not the foot that you lead with. It's a wonderful, like Danny tucks it in his shirt pocket. And he says, yeah, I believe this and I pursue my research with humility, but I'm not going to come out there and punch you in the face because you're old Earth. And so yeah, I think there are plenty of young Earthers and old Earthers that have very passionate opinions about the ground that they stand upon. But it is a matter of pursuing your research area of research and expertise with humility. And you could take this issue with Calvinism or Arminianism or Molinism or
But during the
any
pandemic,
ism within the church where we have our in-house.
during the pandemic, this issue of not believing the science has become in the secular world a really big issue. That we're ignoring the science and we're doing this or that. So I think people are super sensitive to what they think is unscientific.
Right.
And
So
they
it's
turn off.
it's because
I mean, some of them turn off even. I've seen that happen.
Something.
well, I'll tell you, in my field as an apologist, the term apologist is like the term creationist. It's a pejorative, Rick, for the reasons that you mentioned. People, I mean, I talk to atheists a lot. You say the name of Jesus, you quote scripture. My gosh, that's the same kind of thing now. It's even like more fingers in the ears. People just hate it, just the intensity of everything. It's coming to bear. It's really coming to bear on through science, philosophy, education. It's really becoming more and more difficult to put that Christian foot forward and make a proclamation about your faith in Jesus and all of the implications that come of it. I mentioned Stephen. I didn't read the passage in Acts 7. They hated him. I mean, he saw the glory of God and proclaimed it to them. He spoke to them and they killed him. Of course, that's what Jesus did too. But we as Americans are, we've been spared this. And I don't know, I'm not making a prophecy that it's coming, but it does seem to be, I've been a Christian for 28 years. It does seem to be harder and harder and harder to be able to be faithful to the word and the proclamation of the gospel, whether, and yes, we have our book club, our Atheist and Christian book club we do every month. And we have young earth, old earth atheists, but they mock this idea of young earth. And we had a gentleman who was sitting on the fence with his faith a couple of months ago, and we were just happening to be talking about our Cosmos book for the book club. And we gave him a copy of the book, and he was on the fence about the science. And our book was, we told him, it's not young earth, old earth. It's a collection of essays. Take it, read it. You don't have to be a young earther to be a Christian. And I think that's where a lot of the perception is problematic, that you have to have that. But it's all like with Danny. I was so impressed with his humility that you would give him a few minutes to hear at least what he has to say. But if you have somebody that just kind of barks at you and says, you're this or that, nobody's going to listen to that anyway. So it's just the culture in which we live, the times in which we live. But I wish Christians. We could do a little bit better, and but anyway, that's kind of my thinking on it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I was gonna add one thing, Daniel, is thinking about and Rick thinking about science and old Earth, young Earth, and I think as Christians we probably should just hold an open hand as far as something like that. I mean, I'm an old Earth. I'm in the old Earth camp, and I'm more of a scientist than I am anything else. But there are people that I respect greatly that are young Earth. I think about Richard G. Howe, professor emeritus at SES, Southern Evangelical Seminary. Smart guy, and he holds the young Earth position. So I think it's good for us to hold an open hand. And I think too, you think about science as so wherever we are, at our point in time, it's always the state of the art for science. But you can take it to the bank that 100 years from now, or our grandkids or great grandkids will find our science to be laughable. Just like we do from 100 years ago. I mean, it will continue to advance. We've not reached the ultimate point of knowledge in science, and And so I think it's just, it behooves us just to hold an open hand on matters like that. I think there's faithful Christians on both sides of that discussion.
When I was talking to Dr. Kokomower, who I mentioned in the slideshow, when I picked him up at the airport and we were having a conversation in the car, I'm like, I have a Hubble Space Telescope scientist in my car. This is wild. He asked me what I thought of the age question. I was like, well, what? You're asking me? But he did. And I says, well, but he stopped me and he says, well, here's how I work this. And it was the most amazing answer. I was like, because this is a Hubble guy. He's up there, right? He's the top notch space scientist. He worked with the iconic Hubble. And he says, when I look through the telescope, and he means the telescope, the universe looks old. And that's the paradigm in which he operates professionally. And he says, when I look in scripture, because he's a Christian, it seems like it would be much younger. And he says, I do my science with the current paradigm. And if my science leads me to conclude that this is the incorrect paradigm, I have no problem changing my mind. And in fact, he made an argument that I can't remember about how you could argue for a young universe, because he explained to me in very technical terms why light is so difficult to measure the farther away you go. It was something like this, and I'm going to kill his words, but it was something like, imagine somebody at a window of a skyscraper every 100 feet. So the guy 100 feet up has a tape measure to the ground, but in his other hand, he has a tape measure going another 100 feet up. And another 100 feet up is another guy with a tape measure. He's holding the tape measure from the bottom, and he's holding another tape measure to the top. Now this goes all the way up to the top of the skyscraper. What are you going to get an accurate measurement of the height of that skyscraper by the time you get to the last guy? Well, and so Dr. K says, it's something like that. You put ladders on top of ladders and you use standard candles, and the farther out you go, the harder it gets to measure distance accurately. Now they're pretty good in the local universe. We know that light and all that stuff, but he says there's a great difficulty in light time travel questions that haunts the best astrophysicists. What's light doing out there? And so he's perfectly poised to accept, he has to function within the old Earth paradigm. And that's how he publishes his papers, but he's very much to the facts. This is what the Hubble is showing us. And so he's perfectly willing to change his mind. And he could see how a young Earth creationist could make an argument for a young universe. He could at least acknowledge that. And I talked to another gentleman who doesn't work at Hubble, but who has used Hubble, who's an astrophysicist who teaches in Virginia. Same thing. He's like, here's how you could conceivably argue for a young universe without actually conceding it. He works in the professional realm as well. But so I think the thing that impresses me most, because I've talked to a lot of people, even Carl Sagan's daughter, and I think the thing that impresses me the most with the people that really know what they're doing is the humility. I mean, these people could run over me with a lawnmower of intellect and I just mow me down. And they're so humble and gracious. Like Dr. Kokomower didn't want to offend me on the off chance I was a young Earth creationist. So he was very diplomatic in how he said things, but his humility was incredible. I mean, and so that's really, even Sasha, she was so humble and gentle and sweet. She didn't wear her dad's name on her shoulder. Brother Guy, like the Vatican astronomer, I'm talking to, he came on our podcast. Brother Guy, he's in our book. I know he's Catholic. Okay, so what? Bill Craig, he's in our book. The people that take time for the little guy. I was not published. Nobody should be in a book with me. What am I doing? It's all about Jesus. And so the greatest minds and the people that have changed the paradigms of science have been Christians. So men of science, get out there, do some paradigm changing and be willing to have your paradigm changed, because God can do that. and I think he's going to. Maybe we get to see it. Maybe your grandchildren get to see it. But I think that it's like Daniel in Babylon, right? Nebuchadnezzar made him one of his chief servants. Now, Daniel didn't eat at the king's table, but, like Joseph in Egypt, the Pharaoh said, that guy's pretty good. I want that guy right there. Get him for me, right? And then Daniel in Babylon, and Paul and Festus was not quite the same thing. Festus thought Paul was crazy. But I think the humility is what is most impressive. And these are the people I want to listen to because they are humble and they hold the open hand, as Mike says. They really do.
Do you think that the arguments of young Earth and old Earth and that you're going through just kind of get in the way of the main thing in Christianity?
They're fascinating, and I love them. My friend Wayne, I love listening to his ideas, and I think there's some really impressive potential, but everybody's staring at the light time travel problem. But now you introduce this isotropy and homogeneity problem with these big structures. But I think really it can get in the way, just like your favorite ism can get in the way. Well, I'm a Calvinist or an Arminianist, or our favorite little things can get in the way and cause stumbling and get in the way of who Jesus is. And so our book is very ecumenical. I know that's a bad word, but literally we focused on Psalm 19. We got Catholics and Protestants and Lutherans and non-denominational people in our book, all focused together on the glory of God. It may seem superficial, it may seem artificial, but in this day and age, I work with the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Every month we have an atheists and Christians coming together to civilly discuss things. And my book is the same spirit, that we have Protestants and Catholics together talking about the glory of God. Maybe it's just a start. But if we can get those, we're never going to solve the Protestant Catholic problem until Jesus comes back, I'm sure. But, that what is the big thing, what is essential? And I think it is the glory of God revealed to us in the person and the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. And if Brother Guy can confess that Jesus is Lord and believe in his heart that God raised him from the dead, I'll talk to him, and that's what I want to do. I don't pray to saints, but I don't like the Catholic communion, but oh well, they're still Christians and I still love them. My master's thesis advisor, Michael Ward, is Catholic. He's a Catholic priest. He's taken a vow of poverty and celibacy. And Michael is a fantastic, wonderful man who has helped me in my faith personally. Now, Michael says, now, Daniel, I would love to see you become Catholic. But, it's not going to happen. But I think Michael is a Christian, despite all the trappings of the Vatican. I think he's a believer. So, we strive to find out what is most important. And, I think Jesus really does bring it home. That's where I think the young earth, I think it's fabulous discussion if you can do it with humility and civility, but it's really poison if you smack people in the head with it.
Right.
So, like Rick said about what Sarah has a very definite opinion, but I know Sarah well enough to know that she's talking about people that are embarrassing evangelists for this cause of YEC. Not she doesn't say that about my friend Wayne, right? She knows my friend Wayne. So she's talking about people that put that first and throw it out there and throw it in your face and make that the most important thing. That's where she's coming from in that regard.
Speaking of Sarah too, Rick, you mentioned a couple of the articles that she has written, but if you go on her website, she's got a really an interesting presentation. She and I talked about doing that presentation in this group, and we just have to have a longer meeting to do it because she can't do it in the time slot that we've got. But it's fascinating, I think, in terms of she takes, and Daniel, you'll know what I'm talking about here, but she takes the 7 days of creation and extrapolates to how that relates to 15 billion years now. And it's been a long time since I went through that and read it, but it made sense to me. I mean, I followed the logic on it. So it's really interesting. It's on her website. She's even got her PowerPoint on the website.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
Oh, you've seen it. Okay. So
It's good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm in the West Coast, so it's past dinner time, so I'm going to sign off. But good to see you all. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Doug.
Thanks for the invite. Bye-bye.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good evening. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a question that maybe is more pervasive and would be addressed to somebody that's really studied astronomy or that, scientist myself. And in the vast array of the cosmos that was created by God or whatever that, have they ever, and dealing with that vastness and the more than 3 dimensions available, have they ever come upon a part of this universe in which they see something that looks like a mirror image in another part of the universe? Because I'm a believer in a parallel setup.
Not to my knowledge, Thor. I couldn't even answer that question. I don't know. I don't
Well, that's
know.
why I say it's probably more appropriate for an astronomy, somebody that's really looked at. And they continue to find new
Yeah.
segments too. That's the surprising thing. I mean, there's, this is so vast that.
Oh, like I said, right. Yeah. And that's like Danny Faulkner said, he's like, astronomy, cosmology is kind of weird. You can have your theories of string theory or whatever you want to think. It's the kind of field where you can pursue those kind of questions. And theoretical cosmology is getting stranger and stranger by the minute. They're more mathematical, abstract, and conceptual. And theoretical cosmologists don't do a lot of telescope time, right? So the math tells me I exist in another universe. I'm going.
Humans have that tendency; they want to boil everything down to being finite, as opposed to infinite. Of that, and that's where you're left with how much further do we need to go? Till we reach the limit. There is no limit.
Well, I heard William Lane Craig say there's no physical demonstration of an infinite material property.
Yeah, I would think that entropy kind of kills the idea that matter can be eternal. But it's interesting that as I would mention in the podcast, in the broadcast, that infinity and eternity do come up in these conversations. That's something, and that's Bill Craig's argument. You can't have a physical infinity. You have to have a first cause, which is Anselm and Aquinas and Kalam. There has to be a first cause because, I talk to atheists. It's kind of funny, Rick. When I talk to atheists and they say there's no evidence for God creating the universe, I said, are you sufficient evidence for yourself? And they immediately get the question. And some of them like instantly like, no. Well, they hesitate. And I said, well, do I need an infinite series of evidences to prove that you exist? Or are you sufficient evidence for yourself? And so then the question is, well, then God is sufficient evidence for himself because he's alive. And so people say, what's the best evidence for Jesus, Stan? I said, Jesus, because he's alive and he speaks and he upholds things by the word of his power. He's still doing stuff. And so it's always funny to when it's mostly on Twitter because it doesn't usually happen in person. But I say, are you evidence for yourself? Are you sufficient evidence for yourself? Or do I have to have an infinite series of driver's licenses and birth certificates and eyewitness testimony to validate your existence? And so it is inconceivably impossible. Well, it's not inconceivable because you can get an infinity on paper, but nobody's ever seen an infinity in physical reality. Matter and energy are poor candidates for things that have been around forever, just because of entropy.
If you read Stephen Hawking's books about the universe, he was supposedly a acclaimed atheist, but there's a point in one of his books that someone asked him a question, and he says, if I could answer that question, I would know the mind of God.
Yeah.
Right.
So it kind of dissipates his theories a little bit. And what we're talking about tonight
God's still on the mouth of atheists.
Right.
People are still talking about God.
And we're sitting here, all this discussion that's way over my head, but when you stop to think about trying to convert somebody well, it's not over my head, but I mean, it's more in detail than I understand. But when you stop to think about it, your own spiritual contentment, that's all we're really worrying about. You have to take that leap of faith. You got to choose for it or against it. You can't be lukewarm. You got to either believe it or you don't have to believe it. So that's
right.
the way I've taken it upon in my life, and in a few more years I have, and hope around here.
Yeah.
So.
Daniel, what's your Twitter handle?
@ story_cosmos. And I try to be nice on Twitter. I'm pretty much the same person I am in person as I am on Twitter. I talk about what I do during the day. Twitter's kind of like my job. I have a lot of wonderful Twitter friends that I've never met. I have a lot of support through Twitter from my job, because my job at Watchman is donor supported. So I get a lot of support through Twitter. I have a lot of ways of connecting people with our podcasts and just chit chat. I do puns. I have interesting conversations with atheists, but I always try to keep it civil, to just be different on Twitter. So I'm pretty much me on Twitter, and I have fun and I enjoy it, and I'm on there a lot.
Sarah's pretty interesting on Twitter.
Oh yes, yes. That's where I met her. We met on Twitter 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. What she said something. I talked to her a little bit after the last podcast, and she said, I said, "Is it okay to point unbelievers to your website and to your Twitter?" And she said, "Yeah, but I don't suffer fools."
She doesn't. No. Her husband, Sammy, is a former special forces with the Finnish army.
Yeah, I follow him.
He's got some war stories. Yeah, Sammy's all right, and they have a wonderful daughter. I met her when we were down in Houston in October. And all of you, if you go to my YouTube channel, I don't know if you've seen it. I did a video of Sarah's presentation in October. If you go to Daniel Ray YouTube, you'll see Story of the Cosmos. Daniel Ray, Story of the Cosmos YouTube. I have an hour and some odd minute video that I produced of Sarah giving her talk on her chapter in our book. It's a pretty cool video. And we shot it at a church down there in October. But if you go to my YouTube channel, and you'll see the Salviander video there, it's pretty cool. It's fun. And so it's Sarah's expanded version of the chapter that she writes in our book.
It's good. I've seen it. It is very good. Anyone else have a question before we draw this thing to a close? I don't want to rush anyone, but also want to be respectful of time. Daniel, thank you so much. It was a privilege and an honor to have you come and speak to us. I'm glad you're back in with power and water, and hopefully that stays that way. I'll remind everyone, if you would like a signed copy of Daniel's book, let me know, and I'm just going to give Daniel a list of folks that are interested in it, and he'll work with you.
Or if you have children, grandchildren, atheist friends, skeptic friends at work, people you know at the store, whatever, I will be happy to send. I have Harvest House gave me a bunch of cases just before the snow craziness, so I have several copies I can send to you if you're interested. And then $20 covers the postage and the cost of the book and everything. So yeah.
Thanks, Daniel, for your time.
Email Mike anytime. It doesn't have. Yeah, sure.
Can you sign the Kindle version for me?
Wish there was a way. There's got to be some way to do that, Rick, right?
Yeah.
Technology being what it is, and put it to the screen.
Kindle is so great, taking notes and underlining and
It is.
searching.
Yeah.
It is really good. Next month, we're going to have one of Daniel's colleagues, James Walker. And I think that's next month, Daniel.
He didn't tell me that.
Oh, I thought
James didn't tell me that. No, James didn't tell me.
James didn't. Okay. He's
gonna have to get on.
Speaking on.
No, I'm going to have to get on him.
Okay. Well, his topic it'll be interesting, is on Mormonism. And I want to say James comes from a Mormonism background, right, Daniel? I mean, growing up.
4 generations.
That's what I thought.
4 generations. He is a hardcore as you could possibly be. His story is fantastic, and Watchman Fellowship is what brought him to Christianity and the truth of who Jesus is. And so he's been volunteer, employee, and now president. And that's his bread and butter is Mormonism. He knows it inside and out, backwards, upside and down. We have a podcast he did with Sandra Tanner, the great granddaughter of Brigham Young, or Joseph Smith. No, who is she? Brigham Young's great granddaughter. It's one of our most popular podcasts where he interviews her. She came out of Mormonism and runs a ministry in Utah. But yeah, James, you will enjoy James's talk. It's great.
Yeah, it'll be
Good.
good. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you again, Daniel, for being with us tonight. You're welcome back anytime. All you guys, thanks for being on. I'll send out a link. This is recorded, so I'll send a link out, and you know, if you want to pass it along, you know, certainly feel free to do that as well. But,
Include a little of that Martian dust with the link too.
the Martian dust. Okay, I will, Thor. All right, fellas. Everybody have a good evening. And
Thanks, Daniel.
thanks for joining. Good night.
Bye-bye.